We have a very special guest on today's show. We are bringing on Daniel Popper, a senior writer from The Athletic, to talk about the craziness of the Chargers offseason, like the Austin Ekeler situation, what really happened with Drue Tranquill and the Chargers' interest there, and his latest Chargers mock draft.
You are Locked On Chargers, your daily podcast on the Los Angeles Chargers, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What is up, and welcome into the Locked On Chargers podcast. I'm your host, Daniel Wade, joined as always by my co-host, David Drogemeyer. We've been covering the Chargers together now for 7 seasons, but this is our 5th season as a host of the Locked On Chargers podcast, bringing you your team every day. Thank you guys so much for making us your first listen today. And to make sure you never miss big interviews like this, make sure you are following or subscribing for free on YouTube or wherever you get your podcast from. And today we have Daniel Popper on the show to talk about the Austin Ekeler trade situation, what he thinks is going to happen there, what really happened with Drue Tranquill and why he says the Chargers weren't actually interested in bringing him back for some reason, and his latest mock draft where he went with Dalton Kincaid at 21, but he said there's a very specific way the first 3 rounds should go for the Chargers if they want to get it done correctly. But here he is, Daniel Popper. All right, guys. Well, we do have our very special guest here today. We have Daniel Popper, who's the best beat writer out there covering any beat for my money, but he is a senior writer for The Athletic, and the only paywall I so gleefully pay for is The Athletic, getting out the most premium Chargers content out there. I would highly recommend everyone out there goes and make sure they're checking out The Athletic and Daniel Popper specifically because he just covers his team so well. You're definitely going to want it when Chargers training camp happens too, the most thorough breakdowns of that too. But Dan, thank you so much for coming on, man, and congratulations on the new song, Dreaming. You can find it on Daniel Popper's Twitter, at Daniel R. Popper. You can get the Spotify link there. But hey, man, pretty cool. Thanks for coming on.
Yeah, check me out, Pair on Spotify.
Pair.
Appreciate the shout-out, little off-season project we got going on, doing some tunes. But we're here to talk some football, if I'm correct. This is not a melodic house podcast, is it?
No, I like the melodic house stuff, but I mean, yeah, as long as there's no tacos on that, Twitter stream, we're good. Okay, music fine, tacos no. All right, well, Pop.
Wait, hold on. Slander tacos and then go into the podcast.
Oh no, that's
tacos suck, and now it's time for some. No, tacos
no. Inside joke here for anyone, that wasn't here to trash Daniel Popper for posting, ridiculously delicious looking tacos on his Twitter. Doing honestly all of us a service, I will say. Shout out to anyone. Shout out to the haters for funding this today. But Pop, a lot's gone on so far, and I want to just start with just kind of the approach it seems like the Chargers are taking to this offseason, especially going against a lot of their, specifically Tom Telesco philosophies, right? Max restructuring, 4 big contracts, right? Going all in on this season. I mean, they went all in last year, right? They made the big moves and the splashy moves. They'd made a point to keep this core together, something we didn't think they'd be able to do, keeping all these big contracts in the same, room right now and being able to pay all these without, and also being able to bring back some important guys. But how risky do you think it was of them to go into this and say, hey, we're going to push these problems to 2024 to keep this core together right now?
Yeah, I mean, depends how you view risk.
Sure.
If you're speaking strictly about the short term, then it's not that risky. If you only feel secure in 2023, then it's not that risky because you'll cross that bridge if you get there. And that feels like what this is, because you now have 4 players with cap hits over $30 million next year, and the only guy who's going to be under 30 of that group is Joey Bosa, who is not the youngest 28-year-old,
right?
Injury history, all of those things. So, there's ways around it. The cap isn't real. People say that. You can extend, but the guys that you're looking at are older players, and typically how you get out of that kind of thing is by extending those players. But you don't want to extend a 34-year-old Khalil Mack necessarily, a 31, 32-year-old Keenan Allen.
Right.
So those are the issues that you're looking at. It's going to be a really difficult cap situation to negotiate next year. It's not a situation that Tom Telesco or Ed McGuire, the Chargers cap guy, ever get themselves into. And so you were looking at the cap sheet and you're like, okay, how are they going to get around this? And typically they don't go this route, right. But they're looking at a really difficult 2024 cap situation. That's just the reality of it. It's risky if you get there, but if you don't make it there, then it doesn't really matter. And it's somebody else's problem. That's sort of where they're at. They really felt like last year with all these injuries that they didn't get to see the product realized.
Yeah.
And I think that's like a fair way to look at it. And so, but the only way with the current cap situation to see that product fully realized is to do these restructures and try and run it back one more time. And that's sort of where they're at. But the issue with that is, okay, not only do you have these 2024 problems, but you don't necessarily have a lot of cap space right now to go build out your depth with veteran players. So they are fully relying on the draft to build out the majority of their depth. And like that to me is the most risky part of this situation, because if you're like, okay, we have to hit on an interior defensive lineman in the 4th round, or we're not going to have depth on the interior of the defensive line, like that's super risky, because we've seen what can happen with some of these guys. So like that to me feels
literally last year. Yeah.
Like the riskiest part about all of this is that you're really, you're relying on hitting on like a number of these draft picks to really, build out the depth to weather injuries. You're hoping, right, that you're the Chargers, that you don't have the same kind of injuries that you had last year. I'd be shocked if it happens 2 years in a row. But you're going to need depth at some point. Like that's just the reality. If you're going to win a Super Bowl, you're going to have depth. And that's where they're at right now is they have to build this out through the draft because of their cap situation.
Yeah, that's definitely very dangerous. I mean, I don't like the idea of lottery picks having to be relied on in situations.
I mean, how many of their rookies really made an impact last season, right? If you're looking at that and how many people you're going to have to count on, probably, if you're counting not special teams, probably 2. If you're counting with special teams, probably 4 or 5. Xander, who did get on the field, but still, a risky to just assume these guys are going to be able to come in and not be JT Woods or Isaiah Spiller, where they need a full season to kind of season. No pun intended. Go ahead, David.
Yeah. So, I mean, the biggest story of the offseason, obviously, though, is Austin Ekeler requesting a trade. I mean, the running back market, though, has been terrible. It has not really done him any favors at all. And he's definitely underpaid considering his production. I mean, that's very clear. Do you think the two sides will work out a deal before the season?
We'll see what happens. It's a tough situation because not only does the opposing team have to, create a package that the Chargers are willing to accept, they then have to extend Austin. Because they can go ahead and give up like a 3rd round pick to trade for Austin Ekeler. But if he shows up and they're like, hey, we're not extending you have to play in your current contract, he's not going to play. He's going to do the same thing that he did the Chargers. And then you just gave up draft capital for absolutely nothing. So the team trading for him, right, has to effectively agree to an extension in principle before making that trade.
And
the
numbers he wants to hit too, right? Which is an important part of it.
And that's why you give an agent, right, the permission to go seek a trade, because that's built into all of this. It's baked into the trade is that he has to get an extension. And okay, so if he wants to be paid at market value, what he believes like he deserves based on his production, like what are you talking about here? $12 million a year, $12.5 million a year. Go look at the market. And like, that's not what running backs are getting paid. No. Miles Sanders had a great year last year. Did not really get paid.
He's literally getting Austin Ekeler's contract from a few years ago. Like that's his contract.
$40 million, right? And then you look at Jamal Williams, 17 touchdowns last year. What did he end up at? $4 million in average annual value. Yeah. Like people are not willing to pay for running backs. And so, okay, that's why it feels like the Chargers gave them permission. Go look for it. Yeah, go ahead. Because they know damn well that they're not going to find a $12 million AAV contract out there for a 28-year-old running back who's undersized and already has taken a beating so far in his career. So it feels like they're not going to find anything out there. We'll see. I could be completely wrong. They could find a team that's willing to pay.
It does feel like that, though.
$12 million a year. But so then what happened, right? Then you end up in a situation where Austin doesn't have a ton of leverage because they can't find a team willing to extend him. But he does have some leverage in the sense that the Chargers need him. Now, that could change in the draft, right? They could take Bijan Robinson if he falls to 21 and be like, good riddance, Austin. We're moving on. That could happen, absolutely. But you take a running back at 21, all of a sudden, all of your other needs fall at the wayside. And it's much more difficult to find that, the 3 positions that I'm sure we're going to talk about that you really need to hit on. And so in that sense, like the Chargers would be best served getting Austin back. Now, what is that? Like, how do you make that happen? Is it adding a year on to the contract, giving him a little bit of a signing bonus and appeasing him in that sense? That's what it feels like will happen. That feels like the natural conclusion to this is that the Chargers will relent a little bit without investing in like long-term in him. And Austin will get some cash up front to feel like he's getting paid for what he's done. But one thing I will say is that the Chargers will not pay for pass production. Like they won't do it. They won't be like, oh, you scored 38 touchdowns in 2 years. Here's money because you scored those 38 touchdowns. They're going to pay you based on what they think you're going to be able to do over the length of the contract. And so I feel like Austin's going to have another good year this year. But there is a reality where Austin takes a step back. Like that's just the truth because of his size and the beating that he's taken over the course of his career. Like it's not like he's going to have another 5 years playing at this level. So they have to ask themselves, how many more years does he have? And can we, give him a 1 year extension or something along those lines so that he can get some money up front and both sides can be happy and Austin Ekeler can return to the field. But I think that's like down the road. Like I really feel like we're heading towards a hold-in situation. And then, deadlines force deals. And I think as we get closer to the start of the regular season, they're going to come to terms on something. But I would honestly at this point be really surprised based on the market if a team trades for him and then also extends him at the level that he wants to be extended at.
It seems unlikely. And the thing from his perspective, too, is it also kind of feels like he's one bad injury away from being Jamal Williams and getting $3 million on the open market, right? So I understand him wanting to secure some of that because all these older running backs are one injury away from getting those deals where they're not going to eclipse $4-5 million, even though they've been so productive. So I definitely get that. And I understand it from both sides of it. It's just a messy situation. But
yeah, one more thing I'll add, though, is that Austin is very involved with the Players Association as well. So he isn't necessarily just thinking about himself.
Totally.
I think he's thinking about all running backs and trying to reset this market and get this thing going in the right direction. Like that's how I think he's obviously he wants his and he wants to get paid, which like, who can blame him? But I think he's also thinking altruistically about like, okay, I'm in a position now where I can try and reset this thing for running backs and get this going in the right direction. I'm going to do everything in my power to make that happen because, he considers himself and is a leader for the Players Association as well.
It makes sense. And he talked about on the Green Light Pod, just like maybe that's a short-term deal with a lot of money, without the risk of a long-term thing. Maybe that is 1 year extension at $9 million. Maybe you bump him up a little bit this season. Maybe it is something like that. But man, I mean, it doesn't make a lot of sense to pay these running backs, and the running backs that are getting what he wants, those teams aren't usually successful. I mean, look at the 49ers. That one's still kind of yet to be seen, but like Dalvin Cook, Alvin Kamara, like these guys, it hasn't worked out, for these teams who have been given that money. Derrick Henry's on the market now too. But for the Chargers, though, we have more free agency and draft talk to get into with Popper. But if you're talking about the draft and you're talking about best player available, I'm going to talk about the best protein bar available. And of course, I'm talking about Built Bar. And right now, guys, make sure to check out the Mint Brownie Puff. They already had Mint Brownie as a regular Built Bar, but now you can get just a soft cloud of deliciousness Mint Brownie Puff, along with all the other great flavors, because that's the great thing about Built Bar, is the flavors. If it doesn't taste good, frankly, I'm just not going to eat it. So to get something that's, well, first of all, fit on my diet and also tastes delicious and is also 100% covered in chocolate and soft and easy to chew, it's just too much for me to pass up, especially when most bars have only 130 calories and 17 grams of protein. Break up the monotony of your diet. Get something that tastes great and get something that has great flavors, like cinnamon churro. What else is cinnamon churro flavor that fits on your diet? Nothing. Chocolate, double chocolate, peanut butter brownie. So many great flavors to choose from, and you can now find them at your nearest Walmart or Sam's Club. You can pick up a 4-pack box or a 13-bar box where I almost guarantee that you would find your favorite flavors because there's so many great flavors to choose from. So make sure you guys check it out or go online and save some money since you listen to the show. Go to BuiltBar.com and use the promo code LOCKEDON15 to get 15% off your next order. With the cap situation, they were heading into going to have a really hard time to keep some of their best players. And I want to talk specifically about Drue Tranquill because they got the other guys done. Drue Tranquill was the one where it seems like they went with it in a different direction. One way or another, they did go in a different direction. But there has been a lot of things said out there, especially on social media. So from your perspective, what do you think it was? Chargers tried to get it done something before free agency started, and then he went to try to test the market, came back, deal's not there. Or was this something, hey, we didn't get enough from that position. Maybe it's not all Drue Tranquill's fault, but we need to go in a different direction, and we had our eyes on Eric Kendricks the whole time.
Yeah, so I have some intel on this. I haven't really put anything together on it publicly, but I can tell you, according to sources, that the Chargers never gave Drue an offer, and they were from the jump going in a different direction.
Interesting.
Okay, so that's what happened. It wasn't a situation where Drue had an offer, after the season and then decided you want to test the market and see what was out there. That's not what happened. I can report that. And so, the Chargers wanted to go in a different direction. That was clear from the jump. And, the linebacker market was super saturated, obviously.
Yeah.
And you had a lot of these guys, re-signing with their former teams, Quincy Williams, those kinds of guys. And a lot of these guys ended up in the $6.5 million range, which is what they signed Eric Kendricks for. Now, I don't know if the Chargers knew that Eric Kendricks was going to get cut and they were going to target him. I don't have
Sure.
that. I don't know.
Maybe that changed the plan. Sure.
But typically teams have a good sense of who the cap casualties are going to be. They obviously have ties to Minnesota. Ryan Ficken, coached there. So not saying that that's what happened, but I'm just saying like it's not hard.
Well, and Jeff Howard now too, right? New linebackers coach this guy.
Right.
Yeah.
Not hard to connect the dots there, and teams typically have that kind of information. I don't know. I can't tell you that they knew that this was the direction they were going to go in. What I do know is that they decided that they were going to move on from Drue Tranquill. He was, an Anthony Lynn pick, 2019, drafted under the previous regime. You can go through the depth chart and see a lot of these guys that either, are no longer on the roster or haven't
one way or the other. Yeah.
So that's what happened with Drue. I'm surprised they made that decision. I personally would rather have a 26-year-old Drue Tranquill ascending than a 31-year-old Eric Kendricks. But the Chargers opted for a different direction, and they're going to roll with Eric Kendricks. And I think they believe that, he's going to be a really good influence on Kenneth Murray. Now, I thought Drue Tranquill was a really good influence on Kenneth Murray, but, you're also talking about, like you said, they brought in Jeff Howard as a linebackers coach. They moved on from Michael Wilhoit. Drue and Wilhoit were very close. So, you can kind of connect the dots and read between the lines there.
That was kind of interesting too, just because you saw Kazir White and Drue Tranquill go back to back with their best career seasons. Maybe we have a kind of a different view of what good linebacker play is because of the linebackers. Maybe that skews it a little bit, but that was a little interesting, even though, yeah, he might be like a Joe Lombardi type of guy, at least as far as the connections he had coming in.
Yeah. Kazir's situation was a little bit different, but the reality is this position is never going to be, highly, highly valued with this defense and with Brandon Staley. That's just the reality of the situation. Considering what Drue signed for, up to $5 million. So that's not even a $5 million guarantee.
Surprising.
And I know that he told me at the end of the season that he didn't want to, in the locker room, that he wanted to be here, raising his family here, had his children here, he wanted to stay in Southern California. And so I think this whole narrative that, he signed with the Chiefs to get back at the Chargers, that's not how any of this
he selfishly went out and thought he could do better and poo-pooed what the Chargers sent him. Sure.
That's not how any of this went down. It was the writing was on the wall from the jump. And that's just, I feel like that's how they're going to approach linebacker, moving forward. And so you look at Eric Kendricks' deal, it's a 1-year deal. You look at the breakdown of that contract, it's a 1-year deal, and then they'll probably figure it out again next offseason, but linebacker's never been something that Brandon Staley's really valued since he, became a coordinator in 2020 in terms of investing resources. Obviously you need linebackers, you need good linebackers, but I think the way you go about finding those guys, do you have to really devote significant resources to that position to find guys who can do the job at a high level?
Well, hey, moving on to a couple of guys that we really thought were gone. I mean, kind of going into this free agency period, and that would be Morgan Fox and Trey Pipkins. But, the Chargers found a way to bring both of them back. How important of a move do you think it was to be able to get deals done, considering the holes that they would have left?
Yeah, really essential. I'm shocked that Morgan didn't have a bigger market.
Oh, same.
He was awesome last year.
Dude.
I don't know,
well, especially you see Daron Payne's making $22.5 million per season. I know he's a
first-round
pick.
Morgan's not Daron Payne, but but you can
there's a giant gap and there's a lot of gray area there.
Yeah, and you see what the Chargers paid Sebastian and what they paid Austin Johnson. They're paying those guys to defend the run. Morgan isn't necessarily that good of a run defender, but he showed you what he could do as a pass rusher, and interior guys that can get after the quarterback consistently are typically valued.
Yeah.
That was really surprising. I honestly, I don't know why his market didn't materialize. I've been digging on that, but haven't been able to.
Do you think that it's because he plays in the Brandon Staley system and he had his best years in the Brandon Staley system?
Or even the undrafted free agent part of it? Because I know that stuff always seems to get held against, if you're an undrafted free agent, it seems like that follows you a little bit, even, when you go on to do better things. I mean, he's a top 10 statistically, analytically pass rusher on the interior. That's crazy for me to see that guy get that money.
Yeah, I think that the hypothesis that, he's only had outstanding seasons in Brandon Staley's defense, I think that's actually a decent hypothesis.
It's his only 2, 6 sack seasons. Obviously, everything else has been well below that.
Right.
Yeah.
Anyway, kind of a moot point. Chargers get him back at like a really reasonable
Such
deal.
a good deal.
Crazy value.
And I think with Morgan, like the thing that's great about him is that you know what you're getting. Like he's a professional player. You know what you're going to get. You know you're going to get the pass rush. You know
no learning curve in the defense.
Nope. And you know you're going to get like a capable run defender. He's not an elite run defender, but he's a capable guy that's going to go in there and play tough and rugged, to use their term, And so I thought that was really important. Just surprised that his market didn't materialize, but that's good news for the Chargers. And then I always felt like the Chargers were going to do everything they could to bring Trey Pipkins back. I mean, I've been writing about him since he was a rookie. The work that he put in last offseason in Dallas, many weather, like he was a completely different player, and I give him so much credit.
Huge credit.
I mean, he moved into an Airbnb in Dallas and was just working every day on getting better. Like, and that's what you have to do, to develop from a Division II Sioux Falls project into like a legitimate starting right tackle. And he deserves it. He deserves it because he played that well last year. And I think the Chargers really appreciated him battling through that MCL sprain, that knee injury, because he aggravated it 3 different times over the course of the season. He only missed 2 games. And the alternative was Foster Sorrell going in there at right tackle. And like, let me tell you, Trey Pipkins was fully aware of like how important he was to the team. And he, put his health on the line in a contract year, and that matters. And it's good to see, a player rewarded for doing that. The deal makes a ton of sense.
Yeah.
I felt like he was going to end up in that, $7 to $8 million range.
The Andrew Wiley range after that one dropped.
Range. Yeah. I give the Chargers a lot of credit for over the last 2 years, the way they built this offensive line, because they have a really solid group now. Obviously they moved on from Matt Filer, but you go left to right and you're like, okay, this is like a legitimate group. And I mean, it's the first time in a long time, I've entered a season being like, I don't think I have any concerns about this starting group.
It's wild.
And they're all signed through 2025, Daniel.
Right. And they're young. And like Rashawn Slater is going to come back and be a better player than he was as a rookie. Jamari Salyer, we'll see what happens at guard.
We'll see.
But I would expect him to be better at guard than he was at tackle. I think like the narrative on him has kind of gotten out of control a little bit, where like everyone's like, oh, he's like an all-pro player. Like he was fine. Like he was functional out there.
Which is great for a rookie. Fine is outstanding for a rookie.
Right. He saved their asses because he was much better than Storm Norton, but he is going to be a better fit at guard. Like the way that he plays, the way he moves, his strength, he'll be much better in there. And I'm fascinated to see what it looks like with him playing next to Rashawn Slater and next to Corey Linsley, because that should elevate him. You expect Zion Johnson to be even better. I mean, I saw flashes of greatness from him. I think you're just looking for more consistency from Zion Johnson. And then Trey, a healthy Trey Pipkins is like a legitimately good starting right tackle. So like you don't really have any weaknesses there. We talked about depth earlier. I think the key here is finding depth on the interior of that offensive line. But 2 like very important signings. And I don't think in terms of how the money shook out, I don't think the Chargers could have hoped for anything better than how that went down with those 2 players.
And if you feel good about your interior guys, like maybe he's a guy that you could be your swing tackle, right? Like in case of emergency, maybe he is that tackle for you. And maybe that gives you some more flexibility to just add in the interior instead of feeling you have to bring in a swing tackle. Exactly. And I think the other thing about the 2 guys, Morgan Fox, Trey Pipkins, outstanding chance to outplay those contracts. And you want to talk about past versus, future production. Those dudes should be able to produce at levels, especially a healthy Trey Pipkins, that should dwarf what those contracts are compared to the guys that are playing at a high level at those highly paid contracts. But we will get back to Daniel Popper and why he thinks the Chargers should not take a running back in this draft class. But maybe it depends on Austin Ekeler's situation and his other draft thoughts, because he has that latest mock draft, Pop Mock 2.0. I do need to tell you guys that the official betting sponsor of the Locked On Chargers podcast is FanDuel. And guess what, guys? The tournament is heating up. Another full slate of games today, and especially when I'm watching not football, the best thing to do is have some action on it, and the best place to do that is with FanDuel. And right now is a great time, guys, because new customers get a no-sweat first bet up to $1,000. That's bonus bets back if your first bet doesn't win. So just download the FanDuel Sportsbook app. It's safe, secure, and super easy to use, and one of the best times of the entire year to get in on the action. The time is now, guys. You can also do that same game parlay with FanDuel. Multiple props on the same game. Multiply your winnings. So don't miss the chance to get that no-sweat first bet up to $1,000 in bonus bets when you go to FanDuel.com/lockedon. That's FanDuel.com/lockedon to learn more. Make every moment more with FanDuel, an official sports betting partner of the NBA. If you did also most recently just released the Pop Mock 2.0, Chargers mock draft 2.0 at The Athletic, and love the pick you went with at pick 1. You ended up going with Dalton Kincaid, and I mean, you can talk, about tight end and picking tight end and the amount of tight ends in this draft class because it's supposed to be a good one. But how much do you think Kellen Moore, like how much did the Kellen Moore coming in to be Chargers offensive coordinator kind of influence you into picking that for them there?
Oh, it's everything. Yeah, they're going to use more 12 personnel this year. And I don't think that Brandon Staley's vision for how they use tight ends was ever fully realized in Joe Lombardi's offense. Now, in 2021, I went back and looked at the numbers. They were like middle of the pack in 12 personnel usage. Maybe I think they were like 11th or 12th. This past season, they dropped down into the 20s. They were under 18% in 12 personnel usage. And some of that was like personnel and injuries. And, Donald Parham was out. You had, Richard Rodgers in there. Trey McKitty took a step back, right? But like if you want to really function as like a 12 personnel team and major in this, like they need more talent at tight end. Like Gerald Everett is what he is.
Yeah.
Like good move tight end, great with the ball in his hands. He's going to be liable to a few mistakes every single game. Like that's just what he's going to have some drops. He's going to have some mental mistakes. And he's like, at best, like an average blocker.
Sure.
But doesn't have that want to as a blocker consistently. Right.
And he's smaller for a tight end too. And that's part of it.
But he's a good piece. Like
Great signing. They needed him. Yeah, I think better than Jared Cook, I'll say.
Right. But you need versatility and skill set in that room. And so Donald Parham, okay, like when healthy and on the field, difference maker. But can you trust him to be on the field?
How can you at this point? Yeah. I mean, unfortunately.
Yeah, it sucks. Like it sucks to say, and I don't obviously like And
I don't blame him for bringing him back either, though, right? I mean, getting him for like 2 years for what the one tender would have been is crazy. But like, I don't blame him for bringing it back. You just can't put all your eggs in that basket. Like,
yeah, I don't know. Have you guys seen details on that contract? Because I haven't seen any details.
Yeah, it's 2 years, $2.63 million, I believe.
Okay. Yeah. So that's basically a veteran minimum contract.
Yeah, 2 years for the price of one, basically.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. So 2.6 was the tender. Who reported that? Because I still haven't seen that. Do you remember?
No, I can find it. I'll send it to you after.
All right. So yeah, I mean, whatever it was not going to be what the tender was. So, but like, okay, like went on the field, really interesting piece, but I don't know if you can trust him. Trey McKitty, it's like office space. Like, what do you say you do here? Like, what is he bringing to the table? Because he's not. He's not a pass catcher, and he's not going to be a pass catcher. Like he was drafted to be a blocker,
right?
And he underwhelmed in that area last year. I thought he showed some signs of positive growth as a rookie, but I felt like he really took a step back last year. So,
and specifically got called out by Brandon Staley, and he doesn't do that for a lot of guys. I mean, at least as far as like him saying, "Hey, we didn't get enough."
Go watch the film.
Oh yeah,
go watch the film on
it. Wasn't just not good; it was worse than not good, I would say.
Okay.
And then how much of that impacts the running game, right? Such an underrated part of why the Chargers' running game wasn't good.
People are tweeting at me like 30th ranked rushing offense, and you're drafting a tight end. It's like, what? Oh, yeah, exactly.
Yes.
Like you're making my point for me, you doofus. Like, sorry.
Right. Well, I know, and like the other thing too is like DeAndre Carter. DeAndre Carter's out there. Michael Bandy. Like people don't realize how much the perimeter stops good runs from being great runs, right? And okay runs from being good runs. Like it's such a big part of it.
Last year was the tight end blocking. So, but to make the point here. Like, yeah, they have 4 tight ends on the roster, but is it the best group you can possibly have if you're going to be a 12 personnel team? No. And on top of that, do you have like a Dalton Schultz type player that was a key piece in the Kellen Moore offense? Like Kellen Moore and Brandon Staley believe in using tight ends. And so like, Trey McKitty being the 4th tight end in the room is a much better scenario than him being the 3rd tight end.
It feels like it has to be it has to be addressed. Especially when Brandon Staley's out here saying he's going to improve it, right? He said it. Right. He said it's a group that we can improve on.
Exactly. So the question is, who's it going to be? Now, Kincaid's not like a blocker, but he's a guy that can really make a difference in the passing game. And that's really, I've gone through every single tight end. Like the point more was like, here's what it looks like if they take a tight end versus like Dalton Kincaid's going to be the guy. But the one thing I go back to is like, okay, Brandon Staley has coached against Travis Kelce 4 times since he took over as head coach. Travis Kelce has 500 yards receiving and 5 touchdowns in 4 games.
It's gross.
That's silly.
If I'm Brandon Staley, I'm like, I want to find the closest thing to that guy I possibly can because that guy makes a huge difference. And I'm not saying Dalton Kincaid is going to be Travis Kelce, but if you can find a player like that who can be a mismatch in the passing game, that's a huge.
He's the best shot at in this draft class to be that, though. If you're talking about what the closest thing to that, I mean, if it's somewhere in between Zach Ertz and Travis Kelce, aren't you thrilled with that? Aren't you overjoyed?
Right. So then, but there's other guys like Darnell Washington out of Georgia is like a beast of a blocker, and then
it makes a lot of sense too. If they don't go that round one, I mean, in round two, if they went that and they go edge round one, Darnell Washington in round two, sign me up.
Yeah, or Tucker Kraft, this kid out of South Dakota State. Like, there's going to be some options there, as far as taking a tight end. But like, just because you have 4 tight ends on the roster doesn't mean you're not going to try and upgrade that if it's going to be a big part of your offense and you want to be a 12 personnel team and you want to improve your running game. So that's why I think, investing in tight ends is a real possibility. But there's other options, obviously.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, looking at your mock draft here, your mock draft 2.0, the Chargers, you have them selecting a tight end, an edge rusher, and a playmaking wide receiver in the first 3 picks. Do you think that's the best case scenario for LA to hit those 3 positions on the first 2 days of the draft?
Yeah, I think those are the 3 positions that you have to target, right? You look at. Have you guys looked at the wide receiver depth chart lately?
Oh, yes. It's 3 deep, right?
Yeah,
I mean,
3 deep. It's
3 deep and probably missing a couple of, just skill sets, I would say, as well.
Right. Well, let's just assume that DeAndre Carter comes back as punt returner and, 4th or 5th wide receiver. Let's just assume that happens. I'm not saying it's going to, but like high likelihood that happens. You still need another piece there, in my opinion.
Oh, yeah.
And, what's missing is what has always been missing, and it's like that legitimate explosive speed threat, whether that's yards after the catch, horizontal stretching the field, or vertically stretching the field. So could they do that in the first round? Sure. Could they do that in the second round? Sure. Could they do that in the third round? Sure. Edge rusher, like Chris Rumph got hurt last year. Unfortunate. We didn't really get to see him play, without that MCL sprain. To me, I feel like he's best served as like a 4th edge rusher and then like a core special teams guy. Like that feels like where he's going to make his money in the league. And so like you need some juice behind Joey Bosa and Khalil Mack. You got a full healthy season out of Khalil Mack. What are the chances that you get 2 consecutive fully healthy seasons out of Khalil Mack? And then, Joey Bosa, we'll see. I mean, he got this core muscle surgery done. He said he's never felt better. And then, in his first game back, he tweaked it. So it's like,
it never really looked right after he tweaked it either.
Yeah,
right.
Exactly.
In the playoff game either.
Exactly. So you need some depth there. Now, could they bring back Kyle Van Noy? Sure. I know Kyle Van Noy played really, really well down the stretch of the season. It took him a little bit to get into form and to get over that back injury he had earlier in the year, but there was a stretch there where he was a non-factor. It's not like he was great the whole season long if we're looking at it objectively. And then you need like a future plan as well. Khalil Mack's gonna be in his age 34 season in the season after that. Like having a young guy that can ascend and take over that spot from Khalil Mack and also give you that rotational piece is like another big thing that the Chargers need. So those 3 positions, but there are other options. Like you feel like, okay, those are the 3 positions, but if a guy
Bijan Robinson,
right? Or there's some other guys.
But Daniel Popper, I know you do not believe in taking running backs. I heard you on Chargers Weekly. You're not a fan if they would go Bijan Robinson. Is that fair?
Well,
or does he break the mold enough? You know what I mean? I think that's the question, right? Like, is he that special that you would get rid of your no running back in the first round kind of philosophy for him?
I guess like specifically with the Chargers situation, if you take Bijan Robinson at 21, how do you fill these other needs?
I don't know. I mean,
it's
you
a fair
have
question.
to.
Yeah.
Well, because this is the thing. So what you were talking about, going to your point, right? The Chargers have done a good job in the sense that there's not a lot of starting spots they have to fill, right? I mean, you could say a Alohi Gilman spot, maybe that's up for grabs, and they could try to upgrade on that. But like, at what point is wide receiver a pseudo starting option because you're probably going to need that guy, right? At what point is edge rusher a pseudo? You need a starter there because that dude is probably going to start 8 or 9 games for you this season, right? So like, I think that's where it goes.
That's the point I'm trying to make.
Yeah.
Like I got a bunch on Twitter again for saying that they have like work to do on the roster.
Sure.
Like, well, their starting positions filled. It's like, tell me the last time a team went an entire season with all their starters playing 16, 17 games.
It doesn't happen.
Yeah.
And so like, it's mind numbing to me that Chargers fans could end up in this situation where they're like, we are set because we have all the starting positions filled when they've been watching this team for a decade. Every year, dude. It's every year.
Yeah.
Okay, it's a stars, like Nate Tice said it at the start of last season. He was dead on. It's the stars and scrubs. And guess what? when a starting player goes down, you need somebody capable to come in and take over. And that's what we're talking about here. And the only way that you make a run to a Super Bowl is if you have that depth. And so you go running back at 21. You still need a speed wide receiver. So what are you going to do there? You're going to roll into the season with the trio of Keenan Allen, Mike Williams, Joshua Palmer, and DeAndre Carter, and like that's your group again?
Please
okay.
No.
And then you might have to start Michael Bandy in a playoff game because you don't have anybody left. Right.
Where are you finding that edge rusher? And then you're gonna go with the same group of tight ends and expect to be able to run laterally because you couldn't
expect the running game to be better just because you took a running back, which is just not the way it works. Right.
So I mean, like, listen, Bijan Robinson's going to be a really good player. Like, and there's instances, I guess like for me, taking a running back like in the Ezekiel Elliott, Saquon Barkley range, like I would never do that.
The generational type.
I personally am going to look for running backs later in the draft. That's just my personal preference. But like if they are uncertain about this Ekeler situation and they feel like Bijan Robinson's like a top 5 player in the draft and they take him, sure, he's going to have a great impact. But, I would worry about the depth of these other spots if you go running back in round 1. That's sort of where I'm at.
Yeah.
With it.
No, I totally get that. And I mean, Brandon Staley, what effect does he have on it, right? Because it seems like his kind of fingerprints, especially when you talk about the offensive line and how much of an emphasis is put there, how much does he really value that position, right? And think he needs a guy like that with or without Austin Ekeler, I think will, play a huge factor in it.
Another part of this too, they took a 20-year-old running back in the 4th round last year,
right?
That didn't touch the field.
Just a total question mark, and that's the hard thing, right?
Right, but I think he's going to be a really good player. But they drafted a 20-year-old, he was 20 years old.
Do you think that they think he's going to be a really good player? Because I think that's probably more important, right?
Yes.
Like what they think about Isaiah Spiller will have, I think, a lot to do with how they address this. I mean, the biggest thing is, right, you've taken 2 4th-round running backs and a 7th-round running back the last 3 seasons, and you haven't hit on any of them, right? So I think that's where people are like,
can throw Larry Roundtree out. Like, you're not going to,
Totally.
I'm saying in terms of like, they've spent capital.
No, I'm more talking about just not being able to hit on rounds 4 through 7 at running back, right?
Let's add some context here. Joshua Kelly, I think, showed that he's a very capable running back.
Could be a hit.
And he sprained his MCL on, blocking on a kickoff in week 5. And we never really saw
He looks so good, man. I swear he like locked eyes with me at training camp because he heard some of the things I had said. And I'm like, man, you look so much better. I'm sorry.
I have never deviated. Go check everything I've written and said on any podcast. I've never deviated. I think that Joshua Kelly is a good player, and I think he's the best football is ahead of him. So
you're saying even after the first 2 years, you believed something like this was possible, where he could have a transformation and look like a different player.
Go read my stuff from years past. I promise you, I've never deviated from this. And so like, it's not that bad of a situation. Now, if Austin isn't there, sound the alarms.
Yeah,
you got to do something and get a difference maker there. But if you have Austin, you have Isaiah, and then the other context here is that Isaiah Spiller hurt his ankle in the preseason.
Yeah.
And that totally derailed his season. An injury at that point as a rookie, especially a rookie that young and a guy trying to get his feet underneath him in terms of pass protection, like that is a huge deal. And so it's not like they have a barren cupboard. Like, could they use a little bit more depth? Sure. To me, like the Bijan Robinson question comes down to what is the result of the Austin Ekeler situation. And if they feel like they are not going to be able to work anything out with Austin Ekeler where they're going to have to trade him, then absolutely take Bijan Robinson because you got to have some sort of solution there. But if you feel like, hey, we're going to be able to get something done with Austin, he's going to be on the team. You have Isaiah Spiller in his 2nd season, and you have Joshua Kelly. Like, I'm okay with that running back room to the point where I don't think it's necessary to spend the capital, a 1st-round pick on a running back when you need
it wouldn't be very high on the list of needs at all, right? If you're going through it, if you so many like edge, tight end, offensive line, defensive line, linebacker. Like there's so many things you could go to before and say that's a worse situation right now than what the Chargers running back room is. And a lot of it just depends on how you feel about Isaiah Spiller because it is just such a big question mark at this point because we haven't seen it, right? So you have to take a leap of faith. Leap of faith really paid off last year, though, with guys like Trey Pipkins, where they had all their eggs in that basket going into the season and said, hey, this is going to work with this guy. And if it didn't, we all know what the alternative would have been, right? But already taken up way too much of Daniel Popper's time. Thank you so much for coming on, man. Make sure you guys are subscribing to The Athletic. It's the only paywall I think is worth paying for, and it's 100% worth it with Popper. And make sure you're following him at Daniel R. Popper on Twitter. So not only can you get the best Chargers content, but you can get some nice, deep, melodic house music as well. Pop, thank you so much for coming on, man. We appreciate you.
Anytime, guys. Thanks for having me.
A special thank you to Daniel Popper. Comes on, crushes it 1,000% of the time. But we will be getting into our own mock draft next week. Mock draft, let's call it 3.0, a 3-round mock draft on Monday for the Locked On Chargers. Mock draft Monday. But again, thank you to Daniel Popper, and make sure you guys are subscribing to The Athletic. Really premium content over there. But to make sure you don't miss shows like this, make sure you are subscribing or following for free on YouTube and listening wherever you get your podcast from. You can also find the show every day on all of our social media. You can find me on Twitter at DanTalkSports and David Drogemeyer on Twitter at DroTalkSD. You can also find the show's page at Locked On LAC and on our Locked On Chargers Facebook page and at Locked On Chargers on Instagram. We will have a fan mail show soon. If you guys want to get your voicemails in, get a 30-second question into 323-524-7924 to get it on the next Chargers mailbag show. But thank you guys again for making this your first listen. If you need a second listen, make sure you guys are checking out the Locked On NFL Scouting with the Draft Dudes, a brand new show that covers free agency, the draft, salary cap management, and more with Kyle Krabs and Joe Marino. Make sure you're finding that on YouTube or wherever you get your podcast from. But we will be back with you guys, as always, on Monday with a brand new Mock Draft Monday with our own Chargers mock draft. But until then, take it easy and go Bolts.